The snow was already up to his knees by the time Silas Gosayun finished tying down the last tent stake. His breath came in ragged clouds, thick and fast in the frigid air, while his fingers, stiff in battered leather gloves, fumbled with knots that used to come easy. The sun had ducked behind the White Mountains hours ago, and now the forest loomed in shades of gunmetal blue and bone white. Silence reigned, broken only by the brittle groan of the wind threading through the pines. The old summer tent flapped and buckled, as if it too wanted to run from this place. Silas stepped back and stared at what his son had given him. Faded nylon, a single zipper, and poles that bent under the pressure of light snow, barely enough shelter for a July weekend, let alone an early January storm. He knew the cold was coming fast. It clawed down from the high peaks like something hunting. His knees were already aching. The old injury from that warehouse fire outside White River in '86 was stirring. His back throbbed. And still he stood there because sitting down might mean not getting up again. He glanced at the empty road where Thomas's pickup had disappeared. A white Ford F-150, new pristine with heated seats and a navigation screen the size of a television. His son had leaned against the hood when they arrived. The smile easy, too easy. "It's peaceful, right?" Like a mini vacation, Thomas had said, tossing the tent bag onto the crusted snow like it was some kind of gift. "You've got everything, poles, stakes, all of it. Used it for elk camp once. It's solid." Silas hadn't said much then. Just nodded and looked around the clearing where the trees opened wide enough to show slashes of sky between their black silhouettes. He'd known Tomas wasn't coming back. Knew it the moment his son wouldn't meet his eyes. Now, with darkness settling and no headlights in sight, the full weight of it pressed in on him. He wasn't just being temporarily relocated, as Tomas had said. He wasn't between homes. He'd been dropped off like a bag of trash on a forgotten trailhead in the Apache Sitgreaves forest, left to fade into the snow. Inside the tent, he laid out the foam mat and opened the thin sleeping bag, his breath puffing around him like smoke. He sank slowly to one knee, then the other. Pain flared in his hip. He grit his teeth and lay back, knees bent, shoulders cold against the tent floor. It smelled like mildew and mouse droppings. He didn't care. They'd sold the house while he was in the hospital. That was what hit hardest. Not the money, he didn't care about money. But the house had been Emery's dream, built on her father's land, every corner soaked in memory. The creaky front step, the bent screen door she never wanted fixed. Gone. Signed away by a son who forged his name. "You'll be better off here," Thomas had said. "Out in nature. You always loved being out in nature." Silas coughed out a laugh that turned into a grimace. He loved the land, yes, but not like this. Not in a canvas bag held together with duct tape, not while his bones stiffened and the wind pushed ice through the seams. He pulled his old army blanket tighter around his shoulders, the familiar olive wool, scratchy but comforting. He had carried this blanket across 3 states and 2 deployments. It had covered the bodies of brothers. It had soaked up blood. It had kept his children warm during power outages when they were small and clung to his legs like puppies. Now it was all he had between him and the dark. The wind shifted. A branch cracked. His eyes flew open. He wasn't alone. His hand moved instinctively toward his side where his old kabar used to hang. Gone now, confiscated at the VA clinic after the panic attack last spring. He sat up slowly, his breath caught in his throat. But it was just the wind. Just the trees shifting and the snow whispering. Still, he stayed awake. The cold didn't just touch him now. It settled in him under his ribs, in the meat of his thighs, behind his knees, where he used to kneel for prayer and fire drills. He pressed his hands together, rubbed them, then exhaled into his palms. His fingers burned, then tingled, then faded to nothing. He thought of his wife, Emery, who had passed just 3 winters ago. Her voice came now and again in the wind, low and full of that gentle teasing tone she'd saved just for him. "You've still got too much pride, Silas," she'd say. "That stubborn streak will freeze you faster than the snow." Maybe it would. Maybe that was the point. He pulled the zipper halfway down and peeked out. The forest looked painted brush strokes of white and ash and deep green. Beautiful, yes, and deadly. He remembered once telling Emery that the mountains would outlive them all, that they didn't change, not really. People changed, children changed, loyalty changed, but the mountains, they just stood. The irony hit him now. These trees would remember him longer than his own blood. He lay back, the cold pushing in like a second skin. He thought of Thomas and the other 2, Raina and Mitchell. They used to draw pictures for him, call him Chief Fight, to sit in his lap while he told stories by the stove. He'd carried them through everything: Emery's cancer job, layoffs, bills, and broken cars. And now they were gone. No calls. No explanations. Just this. His eyes burned, not from the cold, not entirely. He let them stay closed, just for a minute. But the snow didn't wait, and somewhere beyond the next ridge the wolves began to howl. The sound wasn't near, not yet, but it carried. It always carried. And he knew without opening his eyes that something else was coming behind it. Not just snow, not just dark, something older, something that did not forget. The morning didn't come with light, it came with sound. A low, mournful creaking like the forest sighing under the weight of old grief. Silas opened his eyes to find the world outside his tent, sealed in white. The flap was crusted over with a thick sheen of frost. His joints screamed as he sat up, and his breath plumed like smoke in the still air. He pushed open the tent flap and blinked against the bitter cold. Snow had fallen hard through the night, adding another 6 inches at least. The trees sagged under its weight, their branches curved like old men's shoulders. Everything looked softened, hushed. But it wasn't peace. It was silence, like a warning. Silas rose on shaky legs, testing his balance. His knees trembled. Last night's cold had rooted deep in his body. He took a step and nearly buckled, grabbing a tree for support. He'd gone through winters before up north, overseas, even in the high desert back in '79, but nothing like this. Nothing with so little shelter, so little warmth. His stomach growled. He hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. Thomas hadn't left food. No heater, no radio, not even a flashlight. Just the tent, a sleeping bag that barely held heat, and the lie that someone would check in after the weekend. A crow cawed above, startling him. He looked up and spotted it perched high black against the powder-white sky. Its call echoed down like a scolding. Yeah, Silas muttered. I should have known better. His breath was getting harder to control. Each inhale felt like needles in his throat. He pulled the old wool blanket tighter around his shoulders and limped toward the edge of the clearing. There was a thin trail heading south, mostly covered now, but visible where the snow hadn't filled in. Maybe it led to a road. Maybe a cabin. Maybe nothing. Still better than waiting here to freeze. He turned back to the tent, his only anchor, and shoved his blanket and sleeping bag into the old army duffel. He slung it over one shoulder and gritted his teeth against the pain. The snow crunched beneath his boots as he walked. Slow, steady. Every step a small war. The wind gusted from the north, dragging at his coat, testing him. That's when he heard it again. Footsteps. Not animal, not wolf, human. He paused, heart knocking against his ribs. He wasn't alone. Silas crouched behind a fallen log, his breath frozen in his chest. A figure moved through the trees ahead, faint at first, then clearer. A young man wrapped in a thick flannel coat scarf covering half his face, boots heavy with snow. He moved with caution, holding a stick like a walking aid or a weapon. Silas waited. The man stopped suddenly and scanned the woods. "Hello," the stranger called. "Anyone out here?" His voice was young but gravelly, uncertain. Not Thomas, not Mitchell. Silas hesitated, then stood slowly. "Over here." The young man whipped around, eyes wide. Relief crossed his face as he trudged forward. "Thank God," he said. "I thought I was seeing things." Silas stepped into view. "Who are you, name's Cole?" the young man said, pulling down his scarf. "I was hiking, but the storm came out of nowhere. I've been trying to get back to my truck, but the trail's all but gone." "You live out here?" Silas gave a short, bitter laugh. "Not by choice." Cole tilted his head, taking him in. "You don't look good, sir." "I'm not." Cole shifted, then pulled a canteen from his pack and handed it over. "You need water?" Silas drank greedily, the water stinging his throat with its icy purity. He wiped his mouth and nodded. "There's a ranger station about 2 miles south," Cole said. "I passed it a day ago, locked up but still standing. Might be some supplies. Shelter at least." Silas narrowed his eyes. "Why are you still out here then?" "I went back for something I dropped. My compass. Dumb, I know. Lost track of the path. I've been circling." Silas glanced back toward the tent. The cold had only grown worse. If he stayed here another night, he might not wake up. "We head to that station," he said. "I'm not dying out here because my son doesn't want to share a guest room." Cole blinked. "That's why you're out here. Someone left you. Family ain't always what you think it is." Cole nodded slowly. "I hear that." The wind picked up again. Snow danced in the air like ash from a dying fire. They began walking, heads low, boots crunching, no words shared for a long stretch. Eventually, Silas broke the silence. "You from around here, Gallup? My grandfather was Navajo, my mom's white. I come up here to get away sometimes." Clears the noise. Silas nodded. "I served with a man from Shiprock. Best mechanic I ever knew. Could fix a Jeep with a fork and wire." Cole smiled. "Sounds like Grandpa." Their conversation helped the time pass, the weight in Silas's chest easing just a little. It felt good to be heard even by a stranger. An hour passed, maybe more. Silas began to falter. His breathing was shallow, his lips cracked. The snow thickened, blinding at times. "We're close," Cole said. "I think it's just past that ridge." But Silas couldn't answer. His legs buckled. He fell to one knee. Cole rushed to him. Hey, don't fall asleep. Don't sit down. You have to keep moving." "I can't," Silas rasped. "Just need a minute." "No, you rest now. You'll never stand again. Come on." Cole grabbed Silas under one arm, heaving him up. He was lean but strong, determined. "I've got you. Just a little farther." Snow stung their faces. The wind howled through the trees. But then just ahead, wooden beams emerged through the storm. A peaked roof. A chimney. "There it is," Cole gasped. "We made it." The old ranger station was boarded up but intact. Cole kicked at the door with frozen boots until it groaned open. Inside it was dusty and cold, but dry. A stove sat in the corner, a cot against the wall. Cole lowered Silas onto it. "You're safe now." Silas didn't answer right away. He stared up at the ceiling beams. "Thank you," he finally whispered. "I didn't think anyone had come." Cole stood over him, eyes soft. "You're not alone out here. Not anymore." The wind outside never stopped. It rattled the eaves of the ranger station and howled through the cracks in the boards, like a warning that hadn't finished being spoken. Inside, the air smelled of dust, old pine, and rusted metal, but it was dry and still. The kind of stillness that let a man feel his pain without apology. Silas lay on the cot with the wool blanket drawn up to his chest. His legs were stiff feet, numb. A dull ache throbbed behind his eyes. He'd managed to peel off his wet boots and prop them near the cast-iron stove where a small fire now crackled, thanks to Cole's persistence and a half-can of fuel they'd found in a corner cabinet. "You should have told me you were that close to going under," Cole said, squatting by the stove and feeding it another scrap of wood. "I didn't want to slow you down," Silas muttered. "You're not dead because we kept moving," Cole replied, not unkindly. "But next time I'm calling the shots." Silas grunted. "You sound like my daughter." Cole glanced up, one brow raised. She a bossy one, she was, before she stopped returning my calls. That hung in the room like fog. Cole didn't press further. He stood and opened a drawer near the back wall, rummaging through it until he pulled out 2 cans of beans. "Looks like dinner," he said, holding them up. "No label on one. Could be peaches. Could be Spam." Silas let out a weak chuckle. "That's half the fun." They ate in silence, using plastic spoons that bent under pressure. The food was cold and gritty, but it put something in their bellies. The warmth from the fire crawled across the floor, reaching Silas's boots and then his toes. He wiggled them slowly, surprised they still worked. Cole dragged a dusty chair closer to the cot and sat down, stretching his legs with a groan. So he said, "Tell me about him." Silas looked over. "Who the son who left you out here?" "Thomas Wright." Silas swallowed hard. He hadn't said the name, not yet. Cole must have heard him mutter it in sleep. "He was my firstborn," Silas said, voice thick. "Named after my grandfather. Smart kid, hands always in books. I worked overtime to make sure he could go to college. Never thought he'd turn cold." "What happened?" Silas stared at the low flames. "I think, after his mother died, something broke. In all of us, but especially him. I didn't know how to grieve loud like he needed. I just got quiet, worked on the fence, fixed the porch, told him to focus on his career. Maybe he thought that meant I didn't feel anything." "You ever say that to him?" I tried, Silas said. But by then he'd already decided I was more burden than father. When I got sick last fall, he saw it as weakness. He smiled while he signed the hospice paperwork, then turned around and emptied the house. Cole leaned forward. "You were in the military, right?" Silas nodded. 26 years. Firefighter unit for most of it. I've dragged men out of infernos. I've been shot at and starved. But I've never been colder than when I saw the "for sale" sign on my own porch. Cole's jaw tensed. People like him don't understand what kind of legacy they're stepping on. Silas's eyes were wet but unblinking. He said I needed fresh air. Said this trip would help clear my spirit. He didn't even leave me a lighter. Cole stood and added a final log to the fire. It flared orange, throwing shadows across the walls. "I'm not letting you go back to that tent," Cole said. "We'll wait out the storm here. Then we'll figure something out." Silas didn't answer, but something loosened in his chest. Cole turned toward the window, watching the snow drift down like ash. "I used to think blood was enough to keep people connected. But it's not. Sometimes the people who save your life, they don't share your name." The flames popped and spit. "You got somewhere to go when the storm breaks?" Silas asked after a moment. "I got someone I need to find," Cole said. "Her name's Mariah. She's like a sister to me. But she disappeared off the grid last month. Was trying to escape some bad folks." I tracked her to a camp east of here near Cinder Pass. Human traffickers. Worse, Cole said quietly. The kind that wear suits and smile for cameras. Silas shifted. You think she's still out there? I hope so, Cole said. She's tough. Smarter than me. If anyone could survive in a place like this, it's her. Silas closed his eyes for a beat. Then we'd best get you to her. And I'll walk beside you if my legs'll let me. Cole didn't respond, but when Silas opened his eyes again, the younger man had nodded once, slow and solemn. The kind of nod you give before a promise. Outside, the wind started to shift softer now, as if the storm were catching its breath. A man learns a lot in the quiet, especially when he's got nothing left to lie about. The fire had gone out sometime before dawn, leaving only a low layer of coals and a thin gray haze in the cabin air. Silas woke to the sound of snow melting in small drips off the roof, the storm's fury finally calmed. His fingers felt stiff, but they moved. His breathing no longer crackled in his chest. Cole had already been up for some time, judging by the fresh tracks near the door and the pile of gathered kindling. He stepped inside now, shaking the snow off his shoulders and stamping his boots. The light that filtered in behind him was pale, but clear sky was visible through the parting clouds. Storm's past, he said. We've got maybe 3 hours of decent light before the wind shifts again. If we're gonna move, we move now. Silas nodded, pushing the wool blanket aside and grimacing as he sat upright. The bruises on his ribs felt older than they were his back, complaining with every stretch. You sure you're up for this? Cole asked. No one ever really is, Silas said, breath sharp. We just go anyway. They packed quickly, checking for anything useful left behind by the long-forgotten rangers. A spare compass with a cracked glass face, a pair of snowshoes in poor but passable shape. Cole fastened them to his pack, glanced at the map again, and pointed east. If we take the ridgeline down toward Echo Gulch, there's a fuel station 10 miles out. Mariah was spotted not far from there last. Silas shrugged on his coat, the same one Thomas had thrown at him at the trailhead weeks ago, like it was some kind of offering. Now it felt more like borrowed time. Let's walk. They trudged through knee-high snowdrifts, the air sharp and biting. The pine trees stood like silent witnesses, cloaked in white branches, heavy and unmoving. The trail wasn't visible, so Cole used instinct, and the landscape rock formations the shape of the valley below to guide them. Silas didn't speak much. His lungs burned with effort, but his mind was full. The miles gave space for remembering. He hadn't always been alone. There had been birthday breakfasts with Thomas and Eva pancakes, stacked high and dripping with butter. There had been army reunions, late-night talks under stars with men who'd seen things no one else understood. There had been music once. Silas had played the harmonica clumsily, but with heart, and Eva would hum along as she folded laundry on the porch. But silence had taken all of that in pieces, and pride had sealed the door. You keep drifting, Cole said at one point, catching Silas's elbow before he lost balance. You need a break. Silas shook his head. I need truth. Cole didn't answer, but his gaze softened. They paused beneath a fallen spruce, its trunk like a bridge frozen mid-collapse. Cole pulled out a half-frozen protein bar and split it without ceremony. They chewed in quiet, watching their breath vanish like ghosts in the cold. I lied to myself, Silas said eventually. Told myself that Thomas was just angry, that he'd come around. But the truth is, I think I failed him. Cole looked over. How I gave him everything except myself. I thought if I paid the bills and kept the roof solid, that was enough. But I never told him who I was. Never let him see my fears. He grew up thinking love was a thing you proved, not felt. Cole nodded slowly. That's a hard truth, but it sounds like you know it now. Silas stared out into the woods, knowing it doesn't bring him back. No, Cole agreed. But maybe it brings you back. They pressed on the sun, climbing slowly behind the clouds. The ridge narrowed into a steep descent. At one point, Silas slipped on a patch of ice and hit the ground hard. Cole reached down without hesitation, hauling him up and keeping his arm there just a little longer than needed. "You fall again like that, I'm carrying you," he said. "You do, and I'll haunt your back like a mule," Silas grunted. They both laughed. It was short horse, but real. By late afternoon, the trees began to thin. A narrow frozen creek snaked its way down toward the flatlands, and beyond that, in the far haze, they could just make out a cluster of buildings. "That's Echo Gulch," Cole said. "If we can reach that outpost, we can rest. I got folks there who might have heard about Mariah." Silas scanned the horizon, but his eyes were drawn downward to the shallow footprints in the snow that veered toward the creek and disappeared. Not animal, human, barely visible, and recent. "Someone's nearby," he said. Cole turned alert. We tracked Silas, hesitated, but nodded. "If she's out here, we need to know. If not her, then someone who might need help worse than we do." They adjusted course, following the faint trail along the creek. As they moved, the world grew quieter. Even the wind held its breath. The sun dipped low, casting long blue shadows. Every sound became sharper: the crunch of snow, the creak of old wood in distant trees, the faint whistle of breeze through branches. Then they saw it. A makeshift lean-to near the creek, barely more than branches lashed together with old rope. Inside it, a bundle of cloth. Cole rushed forward, crouching low. "It's not her," he said, voice tense. "But it's someone." The bundle shifted, an older woman, hollow-eyed, wrapped in a military poncho. Her lips were cracked, her skin flushed with frostbite. Silas dropped beside her. "Ma'am, you hear me?" She blinked, lips moving soundlessly. Cole poured a few drops of water onto a scrap of cloth and pressed it gently to her mouth. "She's dehydrated, maybe fevered." "Then we carry her," Silas said. "There's no one else coming." Cole met his eyes. "You sure?" Silas pulled his coat tighter and moved to lift her. "She's somebody's Mariah." Together they bundled her as gently as they could. As they hoisted her between them and began the slow walk toward Echo Gulch, the wind rose again, soft, steady. But this time Silas didn't feel cold. Only steady. Only sure. Sometimes saving a stranger is the only way to save yourself. The outpost at Echo Gulch sat on the lip of a weathered hill surrounded by low brush and sagging pine. Smoke drifted from its chimney, a crooked line against the pale sky. The battered sign, half buried in snow, read, "Moore's Supply and Fuel," in faded red letters, and just beyond it a few trailers leaned into the wind like old men too tired to stand up straight. Silas and Cole reached the entrance, nearly collapsing from the weight of the half-conscious woman between them. Her breaths had grown shallow, barely misting in the frigid air. Each step they took left uneven prints behind them, one set steady, the other limping, held up by grit and stubbornness. A bell jingled as Cole kicked the door open. The inside was warmer than expected, lined with dusty shelves and the comforting scent of kerosene, old tobacco, and canned meat. An older woman with a long braid and thick sweater stood behind the counter, jaw tightening as she saw them. "We need help," Cole said without preamble. She was down by the creek, frostbitten, might be septic. The woman nodded once. "Back room, follow me." They carried her down a narrow hallway into a dim room with a cot, an old oil lamp, and a rusting space heater. Cole laid her down carefully while the woman fetched water bandages and something that smelled like boiled spruce. "I'm Arlene," she said. "I run this place with my boy Marky. He's out hunting. Storm cut off our radio for a few days." Silas nodded. We're not looking for trouble, just needed shelter. And he looked to Cole. We're trying to find someone. Let's keep her alive first, Arlene said, rolling up her sleeves. Then we'll talk about ghosts. For the next hour, the room filled with the quiet rhythm of survival. Arlene worked fast, hands practiced. Silas held the woman's arm still, while Cole dabbed ointment onto frost-bitten fingers that barely responded. She stirred once, whispering something that sounded like door, then fell back into a fevered stillness. By the time Arlene stepped back, wiping sweat from her brow, the light outside had faded into an early dusk. She's not out of danger, Arlene murmured. But she's young enough. Has a fighting chance. Silas looked at her face. Beneath the dirt and sunken cheeks, she couldn't have been more than 40. Her hair was matted, but it was long and dark, tucked into a frayed hood. A scar ran along her collarbone, old and raised. Cole sat beside her head, bowed. It's not Mariah, he said quietly. Arlene turned. You know her. I thought she might be someone I lost, a woman I've been looking for. Well, Arlene said, her voice dry as kindling. Maybe you found someone who needs you anyway. Cole didn't answer. He leaned back, letting the heater's warmth soak into his bones. Silas sat by the wall and his back-aching feet numb again. But he wasn't cold. Not in the way he had been in the tent. Not in the way betrayal chills a man from the inside. His heart had a pulse again, steady and quiet. He watched Cole watching the woman, and in that look something unspoken passed between them, an understanding. Later they ate in the main room. Arlene served up thin stew and a single slab of salt pork she'd saved for emergencies. They didn't ask what counted as one. She poured strong coffee from a battered thermos and eyed the pair of them with the gaze of someone who'd seen more winters than friends. You said you were searching, she said, lighting a cigarette by the stove. Plenty of people pass through these parts. Most running from something. We're not running, Cole said. We're chasing. Arlene exhaled slowly. Difference ain't as big as you think. Silas stirred his stew. We found her lean-to by the creek. She had no food, no heat, but she had this. He pulled a small notebook from his coat pocket wrapped in plastic and brittle from the cold. Arlene took it, thumbing through the pages. Her eyes narrowed. These are coordinates, notes. She's been tracking someone. Cole reached over. Let me see. The last page had a name partially smudged but legible, Wade Lansing, and beneath it, Cinder Pass, 3 days out east trail, old mining road. Cole leaned back slowly. That's where Mariah was heading. Silas's gut tightened. You think she was following the same trail? I think this woman might have been close. Maybe even with her. Arlene flicked ash into a chipped plate. Cinder Pass ain't safe, not even in spring. And this time of year, you go out there, you best be ready to not come back. Cole nodded. I've faced worse. Arlene gave him a long look. That's what all the dead ones said. They stayed the night. Arlene gave Silas a spare room with a mattress that smelled of mothballs and old cedar. Cole took the cot near the woman, checking her pulse every hour. Outside, the wind whispered over the roof in long, low sighs. Silas didn't sleep much. His thoughts were heavy with names, Thomas, Ava, even his own. The sound of Cole's voice earlier, the way he spoke of Mariah like she was more than memory, lingered in Silas's ears. When morning came, the woman stirred. Cole sat upright, leaning in. You're safe, he said gently. You're at the Echo outpost. Can you hear me? She blinked slowly, lips chapped and dry. Water, she rasped. Arlene appeared with a glass, holding it to her mouth. The woman drank in slow sips, then fell back against the pillow. Her eyes fluttered open again, this time clearer. She looked from face to face, her gaze landing finally on Cole. "You're not with them," she whispered. Cole's brow furrowed. "With who? The ones at the mine." "They lied. Took her." Silas stepped closer. "Mariah," the woman nodded faintly. "They said she'd be safe, but they knew what she had. The papers, the files. She hid them before they grabbed her." Cole leaned forward, where the woman's hand trembled as she reached toward her pack sitting nearby. Cole opened it, searching until he found a thick envelope wrapped in oilcloth. Inside were photocopies, legal documents, names, transactions, and a photo of Mariah alive, eyes defiant, standing in front of a gate with a rusted sign, Lansing Mining Co. Cole's hands shook. "We go there," he said. Silas nodded. "We'll bring her home." The woman's breath was fading again, but her eyes stayed locked on Cole's. "Tell her," Grace tried. He held her hand. "She'll know." The wind carries more than snow. It carries names, regrets, and sometimes the trail to redemption. The trail east of Echo Gulch narrowed into a frozen ribbon carved between wind-tossed firs and outcroppings of black shale. The snow was lighter than before, but the cold cut deeper, sharp and persistent like unfinished guilt. Silas's breath plumed in short bursts as he trudged beside Cole, his steps slower, deliberate. Each mile was a gamble with his joints and his pride. Cole adjusted the strap on his rifle, eyes scanning ahead. The mining road to Cinder Pass wasn't marked on any tourist maps, and the only directions they had were Grace's scribbled notes and an old forestry trail line Silas remembered from his ranger years. They'd left Echo Gulch at dawn. Arlene had packed them jerky hard biscuits and a thermos of chicory coffee, muttering about fools and angels in equal measure. Grace was still unconscious, her fever finally breaking in the early hours, but too weak to speak again. Arlene promised to look after her, and if she woke, to tell her they'd taken her truth seriously. Now the land sloped upward. Wind whistled low like voices just out of reach. "I remember this ridge," Silas murmured, touching the bark of a twisted pine. "Fire ran through here a decade ago. Took out half the mule deer herd. Nature's way of reclaiming what we ruin." Cole didn't answer at first. He stopped at a break in the trees and pulled out the oilcloth envelope again. His eyes swept over the photo of Mariah frozen in time, brave and stubborn at the gates of Lansing Mining. "You said she was like a sister," Silas said gently. Cole nodded. "We grew up in a group foster home outside Flagstaff. She looked out for me like no one else ever did. Used to say I was the only person who made her feel like she mattered." Silas leaned on his walking stick, "And now she matters more than ever." The silence that followed was thick and real. It wasn't just the cold that made their eyes water. They moved again, cutting through thickets and climbing across icy washouts. Around midday, the road widened and revealed a rusted sign partially buried in snow, "Private Property, Lansing Holdings. Trespassers will be prosecuted." Cole pulled the strap on his rifle tighter. "This is it," he said. They pushed forward. The path curved around a frozen ridge, revealing a clearing that had been flattened by machines long gone. To the left sat an old barn, boarded and sagging. To the right, the mouth of the mine loomed like a wound in the earth, framed in rotted timbers, darkness pooling inside like oil. There were tracks, old tire marks partially snowed over, and boot prints heading toward the mine. "Someone's been here recently," Silas said. Cole crouched, fingers brushing the top of a print. More than one. 2 men. Heavy, dragging something between them. He followed the trail toward the barn, eyes narrowed. Silas followed slowly, leaning hard on his stick. Inside the barn, it smelled of rust oil and rot. The wood creaked under their boots as they moved through shadows and broken crates. Chains hung from nails along the wall. A cot had been shoved into one corner, a pile of blankets recently used, empty water jugs, and there scratched into the wall was a single word, "Help, she was here," Cole whispered. This is her handwriting. Silas scanned the room. She's not anymore. And those boot prints, they go to the mine. Cole's jaw tightened. Then that's where we're going. They exited the barn and crossed the snow to the mine's mouth. A cold wind spilled from inside, unnatural in its stillness. A noise cracked behind them. Cole spun, rifle raised. Two men stepped from the trees, rifles slung low but ready. One was tall and thin, wearing a red parka and mirrored sunglasses. The other, heavier, wore a black trapper's hat and held a shotgun loosely at his side. "You're a long way from the highway," the one in red said casually. Cole didn't lower his weapon. "We're not here to trespass, just looking for someone." "Funny," the fat one said. "People come out here looking all the time. Mostly they don't leave." "We found Grace," Silas said sharply. "She told us what you did." That name hit like a stone. The man in red's smile thinned. "Grace talks too much." Cole stepped forward. "Where's Mariah, even if I knew?" The man replied, voice cold. "Why would I tell you? Because if she's dead," Cole said, leveling his rifle, "I've got nothing left to lose." Silas placed a hand on Cole's arm, steadying him. The two strangers exchanged a glance. The fat one spoke this time. "She's not dead. Not yet. Boss wanted leverage." "Then take us to her," Silas said. "Or we dig this whole place up." The man in red considered them. "You're both outmatched, but stupid is hard to shoot sometimes." He tilted his head. "Come on then. But you better pray she's still breathing." They walked in tense silence, led past the mine entrance to a separate shack, small, metal-roofed, locked with a thick chain. The red-coated man knocked once, then twice. The door creaked open from the inside. Mariah sat on a chair, hands bound, but head up, face bruised but defiant. Her eyes widened when she saw Cole. "You look like hell," she whispered. Cole let out a breath that shuddered at the edges. "So do you." The two men stepped back, clearly uneasy. "She's yours now. But if you think you're walking out of here easy—" "We don't," Silas said. "We just aim to try." They untied her hands. Cole helped her stand, his voice low. "You okay?" Mariah looked from him to Silas, then back. "I will be. But you better have brought boots. I'm done sitting." They stepped into the cold again together now, but not yet free. The wind swirled snow around their feet. Behind them, the men watched silently, guns still in hand. And ahead, through the trees and over the ridge, was the long road out. She may have been freed from the shackles, but the truth was the tightest chain of all. The snow fell in heavier flurries, now soaking through the seams of their coats and layering over their boots as they moved away from the shack. Mariah leaned on Cole more than she wanted to, her legs shaky, but her eyes never left the tree line. She refused to look back at the men still watching from the shadows. Rifles slung but not lowered. It wasn't over. She knew it. So did Cole. Silas kept pace beside them, jaw clenched and breathing labored. He hadn't spoken much since they left the clearing, but his silence carried weight, like he was bracing for a storm that hadn't hit yet. They didn't take the main trail. Instead, they slipped through the trees, a route Cole remembered from Grace's sketch, winding west through dense pine, hugging the ravine edge until the ridge narrowed. Snow muffled their footsteps and covered any tracks they might have left. Still, Mariah kept glancing back. "How long was I gone?" she asked finally, her voice low, like she wasn't sure if she wanted the answer. 4 months, Cole replied without looking at her, but it felt longer. Silas added, "Grace found us, risked her life to get to Echo Gulch. She told us what happened." Mariah swallowed hard, her voice raw. "Grace, She made it. She's alive. Hurt, but healing, Silas said gently. Mariah looked away, eyes shining. She wasn't supposed to come. I told her to run if anything happened. She ran to us, Cole said. Smartest thing either of you ever did. They reached a narrow stretch of trail, just wide enough for single file. Cole moved ahead, scouting the bend. Silas followed, then Mariah. She gritted her teeth with every step, pushing against the ache in her ribs and the buzzing in her skull. The cold seeped through her bones, but she clung to it. It meant she was still alive. After a mile of silence, she spoke again. There's more. Cole slowed, turned. More what about Lansing? About what they're really doing? Silas nodded toward a fallen log. Sit, catch your breath. Then tell us. Mariah hesitated, then dropped onto the log, pulling the thermal blanket tighter around her shoulders. They weren't just holding me for leverage, she began. They thought I knew something. Truth is, I didn't at first. But after weeks in that shack, I started listening. People came and went. Men in suits. Trucks at night. No headlights. I heard them talking through the walls. Cole crouched beside her, brow furrowed. What were they moving? Toxic waste. Barrels of it, from old military stockpiles. Lansing was paid to bury them in the abandoned shafts. Off the record. No permits. No oversight. Silas's eyes narrowed, and they used Grace and you to keep it quiet. They used Grace to threaten me. Said if I didn't cooperate, they'd hurt her. But she escaped sooner than they expected. After that, they just kept me locked up until they figured out what to do with me. Cole stood abruptly, fists clenched. And the authorities don't know, they might suspect. But Lansing pays off whoever they need to. I tried reporting it before. No one listened. Then I disappeared. Silas exhaled slowly as if trying to contain the fury rising in his chest. If that mine collapses with those barrels inside, it won't just poison the mountain. It'll poison the water table. That's half the tribal lands west of here. Mariah looked at him. I know. That's why I came back. Cole's voice dropped low. Then we make sure the world hears you this time. They didn't rest long. The storm was tightening and night wasn't far off. Silas insisted on taking the lead, now guiding them down a path he once patrolled during his ranger days, a shortcut if they could beat the wind. As they pressed forward, Mariah's heart thudded in a rhythm that matched the cold. Not just from fear, but from what lay ahead. Telling the truth was only half the fight. Surviving it was the rest. Behind them, hidden by falling snow and silence, a pair of eyes watched their retreat with interest. A radio clicked on. A voice answered. Orders were passed in static and code. The hunt had begun. We didn't bring the storm, but we sure as hell lit the fuse. The wind began to carry voices, sharp, fleeting like ghosts caught in the trees. Cole stopped mid-step, hand raised in warning. Silas ducked behind a snow-laden spruce, pulling Mariah gently down beside him. She winced, but stayed quiet. The trail behind them was no longer empty. From the ridge above, faint flashlight beams blinked in and out through the pines, swinging wildly, searching. They're tracking us, Cole muttered, eyes sweeping the slope. Dogs'll come next. Silas drew a breath, his voice steady. We can split. I'll lead them off. No, Cole snapped too quickly. Then he softened. They'll shoot on sight. We stay together. Use the ravine. Mariah's fingers tightened around the blanket clutched at her chest. There's a fire trail ahead, she said. It cuts east toward the spillway. If they're using GPS, we'll disappear under the rocks. Cole met her eyes. You sure? I spent weeks mapping the echo of every step in that place. I'm sure. They moved fast, cutting low through the snowdrifts, bodies angled forward against the wind. Every branch crack felt like thunder in the silence. Behind them, the voices grew louder, more deliberate, now punctuated with radio chirps and barked orders. They followed Mariah's lead, zigzagging through a thicket, then crawling under a downed cedar whose trunk had split in two. Cole's boots slid on ice as they descended into a gully laced with jagged rock and half-frozen runoff. Mariah dropped hard onto the frozen bed, breathing through clenched teeth. Her legs were trembling, the cold threading its way into old bruises and places where blood hadn't flowed right in weeks. "You okay?" Cole asked, helping her up. She nodded, but her face was tight with pain. "Just keep moving." They hugged the edge of the creek, using the boulders for cover. Above them, flashlights painted shaky arcs through the darkness. A shout rang out, then another. A gunshot cracked across the ravine too far left, but it sent a warning. "They know," Silas said. "They ain't just chasing, they're closing in." "They've got night scopes," Cole muttered. "We need elevation fast." Mariah gestured to a narrow incline littered with shale and frost. "That ridge leads to the spillway tunnel. It's the only thing left standing when the mine shut down." They climbed in silence, every breath visible in the bitter air. Cole reached the top first, then hauled Mariah up beside him. Silas followed last, slower, one hand pressed against his ribs. The tunnel mouth gaped like the entrance to another world, half collapsed, ringed in black mold and frost. A rusted sign still hung crooked, "Authorized personnel only, danger of death." "No kidding," Silas muttered, limping inside. Inside, the air changed. Warmer, damp with rot, heavy with silence. Their boots echoed softly on the old stone path. Mariah led them through broken beams and caved-in rooms until they reached a small side chamber with an intact door. She pulled it shut, bracing it with a rusted beam. "Won't hold long," she said, "but it'll buy us time." They dropped to the ground, catching their breath. Cole pulled off his gloves and rubbed warmth back into Mariah's fingers. She didn't flinch. "You remember everything you heard?" he asked quietly. She nodded. They said they were accelerating the dump schedule. Storms made it easier to cover up movements. One of them bragged about contracts being paid in advance, no oversight, no paper trail. "You think it's stored down here?" Silas asked. Mariah's eyes darkened. "Parts of it. But the worst of it, it's further in, through the sealed shafts. We're sitting on a powder keg." Cole leaned back, eyes scanning the ceiling. "If we can get to those barrels and document them, we have leverage." "I tried once," she whispered. "They caught me. Locked me in a room without windows for 2 days." Cole nodded. "Then we don't try alone. We bring the whole damn mountain down if we have to. But this ends." Suddenly, a sharp crash echoed down the tunnel. The door shuddered. A voice shouted, garbled, then clear. "Come out, or we light the match." Mariah looked at Cole, horror creeping into her features. "They have accelerants. If they ignite it in here, they won't." Cole said, voice like iron, "Because we're going to give them something else to chase." He stood, pulled a flare from his pack, and struck it. Crimson light filled the chamber. "I'll draw them east. You two double back through the side shaft. There's a ventilation duct that leads to a utility exit." Grace marked it in the map. Silas shook his head. "No, I'm going with you." "No," Cole said firm. "You go with Mariah. She needs you more." Silas met his eyes. There was a long pause, then a nod. Cole took a breath, then turned and kicked open the door. The flare's red glow cut through the dark like blood on snow. Behind him, Silas helped Mariah toward the shadows. She looked back once, just as Cole disappeared down the tunnel. We didn't bring the storm, she whispered, but we sure as hell lit the fuse. You think just because someone shares your name, they share your soul? Blood don't make family. Actions do. The blizzard returned with vengeance. Snow slammed sideways through the pines as if the storm itself were hunting them. Mariah and Silas barely made it out of the narrow shaft before the grate behind them collapsed under its own rust and weight. The path forward was more ice than dirt, but they pushed on, staggering toward the tree line where a dim lantern flickered like a stubborn star. The old ranger cabin came into view just as Mariah's legs gave out. Silas caught her before she hit the snow. He carried her the last 20 feet, teeth clenched against pain. The cabin's crooked porch creaked under their boots. Silas banged once, then twice. It was Ruth who opened the door rifle in one hand and fear in her eyes. "Thank God," she whispered, ushering them inside. "We heard gunshots. Grace went to find Samuel. We need heat food and a line out." "Now," Silas said, easing Mariah down onto a threadbare couch. Ruth knelt beside her, checking her pulse and bruised ribs. "She looks like she's been dragged through fire." "She has." Silas turned toward the radio on the table. "Is this working?" "Intermittently. Samuel's been trying to boost the signal all morning." Ruth's voice trembled. "Is Cole—" "He lit the fuse," Mariah said faintly. "He's drawing them off." Ruth swallowed. "Then we better make sure he has a place to come back to." Outside, the storm beat on the walls like fists. Inside, Silas spoke into the mic, trying different frequencies. Static. Then a garbled voice. "This is Ranger Post 3. Repeat." "Who is transmitting?" Silas snapped upright. "This is Silas Yazzie, former U.S. Army Code Zulu 73. We have whistleblower evidence of chemical dumping near Antelope Spillway. Coordinates," he rattled them off. "We need extraction and media contact." "Over." Static. A pause. "Then copy that. You'll need to hold until morning. Storm's too thick to land. Do you have safe shelter?" Silas looked around the cabin where the windows rattled and frost crept along the sills. "Not exactly, but we'll manage. Just don't lose us. Over and out." He clicked off the mic and turned to Ruth, who was wrapping Mariah's feet in warm towels. "We have until dawn." "Then we better make it count," she said, her voice low. They took shifts through the night, tending the fire, melting snow for water, monitoring the radio. Mariah drifted in and out of sleep, murmuring names and phrases, deep shaft barrels, red-marked crates. Silas wrote everything down, every fragment that might help build the case. Near midnight, Grace stumbled through the door with Samuel behind her. He carried a soaked duffel, heavy and clinking. "Where's Cole?" he asked, shaking off snow. "Running interference," Ruth answered. "We don't know if he made it out." Samuel's jaw tensed, but he nodded. "We'll prep for extraction. Got the drone. If we can get it airborne at first light, we'll have eyes." Grace moved to Mariah's side, taking her hand. "You're safe now." Mariah blinked. "No, not yet. They'll come here." Samuel set down the duffel and unzipped it. Inside were old maps, military-grade flashlights, 2 pistols, and a battered VHS camcorder. "I pulled the last security tape before they cut the lines," he said. "Shows them loading drums into the ravine entrance. It's not much, but it's a start." Silas took the tape and nodded. "We'll use every second." By 3 a.m., the cabin was quiet except for the whisper of snow against the logs and the low hum of the radio. Silas sat at the table flipping through old photos. Grace had brought images of Cole with his sons before everything had gone cold. "Family," Silas muttered. "Hell of a word." Mariah stirred. "They think blood is enough," she said softly. "But you think just because someone shares your name, they share your soul. Blood don't make family." Actions do. Silas looked over. You still believe that after everything? She nodded, her eyes clearer than they'd been in days. If I didn't, I wouldn't have followed Cole back into hell. Silas smiled faintly. He's got fire in him. Reminds me of someone I knew in the service. Wouldn't back down even when the whole unit told him to. Mariah tilted her head. What happened to him didn't make it out, but he bought us the time to get clear. That's what Cole's doing now. The wind let up just after 4. A strange hush fell over the forest, like the world was holding its breath. Samuel stepped onto the porch with the drone in hand. Wind's calm. I'm launching. He powered up the rotors and sent the drone into the pre-dawn sky, its blinking light vanishing into the gray. Inside, the radio crackled. This is Ranger Post 3. Satellite scan confirms movement near your location, multiple heat signatures converging from the north. Confirmation, Silas muttered. They're coming, Eta Grace asked. 2 hours, maybe less. Mariah struggled to sit upright. Then we record everything now, before they reach us. Samuel nodded, inserting the VHS tape into the camcorder. The screen flickered to life with footage of men in hazmat suits loading barrels marked with red X's into the shaft. One paused to light a cigarette. Another cursed about the contract being way too hot. Grace watched with wide eyes. This is enough to open an investigation. Silas turned to the group. We upload this to every channel we can reach. We make sure, even if we're silenced, the story lives. Mariah reached for the mic again, her voice steadier now. To whoever hears this is Mariah Noden. I was buried in the dark for trying to speak. Now I'm in the light. You can bury truth for a season, but it always comes back in the thaw. They worked in silence as dawn crept over the horizon, the first light catching the frost on the windows like a promise. And in that fragile piece, the drone returned its camera full of footage, its silent wings proof that someone was still watching. They were no longer just survivors. They were witnesses, and the storm had finally begun to break. We weren't hiding anymore. We were daring them to come. By the time the first golden rays spilled over the ridge, the forest no longer seemed like a trap, it felt like a stage. The storm had passed, leaving a brittle silence in its wake. Snow blanketed everything, muffling sound, but not tension. Every pair of boots in the cabin was laced tight. Every set of eyes had the same wild glint, resolve tempered by fear. Silas stood on the porch with binoculars in hand, scanning the tree line. Frost clung to his lashes, but he didn't blink. The drone footage had confirmed what they feared: 3 trucks approaching from the north, moving slow and steady like wolves in the snow. They weren't rescue. They were coming to erase loose ends. Inside the cabin, Samuel prepped the footage. They dumped it onto every platform they could find: local radio frequencies, emergency digital relays, even an old satellite modem that took 20 minutes to send 30 seconds of video. Ruth typed with frozen fingers, rewording messages to avoid filter blocks. Every file was mirrored, every route exhausted. Grace tucked another blanket around Mariah, who hadn't slept. Her breathing had steadied, but her body still trembled from exposure and the trauma of the mine. She looked pale against the firelight, but her eyes, those hadn't dulled. I want to stand, she whispered. You're not strong enough, Grace said gently. I wasn't supposed to survive the shaft either, Mariah murmured. But I did. Silas came back inside and shut the door behind him. They're still about a mile out, moving cautious, like they don't know if we're armed. We are, Samuel said, holding up the 2 pistols and a bear rifle from the storage box. Barely, Silas replied, but enough to make them hesitate. Ruth looked up from the radio. Maybe we can bluff them, Set decoys in the woods. Flashlights on tripwires, tin cans in the trees. Let 'em think we've got more than we do. It's not about scaring them off anymore, Silas said. They've committed too much. They're coming no matter what. So we make sure they don't get what they came for. Samuel handed Silas the drone's memory card. Everything's on this. The shaft, the barrels, even their convoy. I've got 3 copies stashed. One in the stove, one in the chimney flue, and one buried under the outhouse. Mariah managed to smile. Poetic. We weren't hiding anymore. We were daring them to come. Grace handed her a thermos of lukewarm coffee. Mariah sipped slowly, then looked at Silas. Promise me something. If they breach this cabin, don't waste time on me. Just get the data out. Silas didn't flinch. Not happening. Mariah's voice turned firmer. That footage is bigger than me. It's proof. It's a reckoning. He held her gaze. You're part of that proof. Your survival is the headline. We don't abandon that. From outside came the low rumble of engines, no longer distant, closer, tires crunching snow, branches cracking. Samuel moved to the back window. They've stopped, about 200 yards out. No movement yet, probably watching. Silas nodded. They'll come at us slow. Sweep and clear, pretend they're rescue. We let them come close and then we make noise. Grace reached into her jacket and pulled out a flare gun. I've got 2 flares left. We pop the first when they cross the tree line. That'll give us about 15 seconds before they hit the porch. Then we trigger the decoys, Ruth added, standing with the bear rifle slung across her shoulder. Make 'em think there's 6 of us, maybe more. Hold until they talk, Silas said. Make them reveal their intentions. At dawn's full break, the knock came 3 polite raps on the door. No one moved, then a voice calm rehearsed. This is Deputy Merrick with Apache County Search and Rescue. We received a distress signal. Anyone injured, we're here to help. Ruth whispered, that's not a deputy. Merrick retired 6 years ago. Silas stepped forward and opened the peephole. The man outside wore a parka with no badge, no name tag, and gloves too clean for rescue work. 2 others stood behind him, one with a clipboard, the other holding a large duffel. State your badge number, Silas called out. The man smiled. You're not in a position to ask questions. Open the door, Silas answered with a flare. The sudden burst of red fire lit up the woods, casting long shadows across the snow. The false deputies dove for cover, shouting commands. From the woods behind them, cans rattled and branches shook as the decoys activated, confusing their line of sight. Samuel tossed a smoke pellet from the back window. It burst into thick fog across the rear clearing. From inside, it looked like the forest was steaming. Gunfire cracked. One of the porch lanterns shattered. Down, Silas shouted, dragging Ruth behind the table. The front door thudded as someone tried to break through. Samuel fired once through the wood. A yelp followed, then retreating footsteps. Grace pulled Mariah behind the couch, shielding her with her own body. This is temporary, Silas muttered. They're regrouping. We can't hold long, Ruth added. Not with this firepower. Then from behind the cabin came another noise, a loud revving engine, and the roar of something larger. The false deputies turned. From the ridge, headlights pierced the fog. An actual ranger truck tore through the clearing, its siren blaring. The attackers scattered. Some ran, one fell. The truck didn't stop. It skidded to a halt in front of the cabin doors flying open. Real uniforms, real badges, and a real camera crew piled out behind them. Silas didn't wait. He ran to the porch, memory card in hand. We've got footage. We've got names. We've got locations. The lead ranger, a woman in her 50s with weathered skin and sharp eyes, took the card. We've been trying to track this operation for months. We lost agents. You just gave us what we needed. Mariah, barely able to walk, appeared at the doorway. I'm a witness, she said, voice firm, and I'm not hiding anymore. The ranger turned toward the camera crew. Get her statement. Now. As the team moved in, Ruth leaned against the wall, tears in her eyes. They came for silence, she whispered. But they'll leave with the truth. Snow began to fall again, soft this time. Not a blizzard. Just winter making its presence known. But the storm inside the cabin had finally passed. And now the whole world would hear the echoes. They thought we'd crawl back into silence. Instead, we marched into the light with proof in our hands. Snow melted off the ranger truck's tires in long, dirty streams, puddling around Silas's boots as he stood at the base of the courthouse steps. Across the plaza, the courthouse loomed tall, sandstone and humming with cameras, journalists, and law enforcement personnel. The flag snapped in the bitter wind, and everything felt heavier than it had at the cabin. There they'd fought to survive. Here they had to prove they were right. Silas glanced to his left, where Ruth adjusted the scarf around her neck, eyes steely behind wire-rimmed glasses. She wore her Sunday coat, navy wool, trimmed with weathered silver buttons, and clutched a canvas bag holding the physical drives. Proof as raw and undeniable as the barrel footage, labeled and time-stamped. Mariah stood on his right, leaning lightly on Grace's arm, her hair braided neatly, face pale but steady. Her coat was too big for her frame, borrowed from one of the rangers, but she wore it like armor. Beneath it, a wire ran to the small recorder hidden in her inside pocket, capturing everything she said. She'd already given her statement to the special investigators the day before, but today she would stand in front of the public. They thought we'd crawl back into silence. Instead, we marched into the light with proof in our hands. The courthouse doors opened, and U.S. Marshal Ellis stepped out with a nod. His broad shoulders and slow, deliberate pace gave him the presence of someone who'd carried too many burdens, but still stood tall. They're ready for you, he said. Ruth looked toward the courthouse. You think they'll listen? Ellis nodded once. They will now. Your footage broke this wide open. They tried to seal the records, bury the story under layers of jurisdiction, but once it hit public broadcast, they had no choice. Silas glanced back at the parked vehicles. Reporters lingered beyond the barriers, shouting questions, their breath visible in the cold. Across the plaza, protesters held signs, some skeptical, others supportive. What if this is just theater? He asked quietly. Mariah answered before Ellis could. Then we burn down the whole theater. Truth first, always. Inside the courtroom was brighter than Silas expected. Natural light poured in from tall windows, warming the wooden benches and gilded seal behind the judge's bench. The air buzzed with murmurs and camera clicks. He scanned the room, spotting Samuel seated near the front, beside the local environmental officer, both with laptops open. Pastor Jeremiah was also there, coat-buttoned, eyes closed in silent prayer. The hearing wasn't a trial. Not yet. It was an emergency injunction, a legal barrier to halt the company's movements until further investigation. But the consequences were immediate. With enough evidence and public outrage, the full weight of the federal justice system would follow. The judge, a stern woman with thick gray hair pulled into a twist, entered and brought the room to order. She didn't waste time. We're here to determine whether sufficient cause exists to halt industrial operations conducted by Sierra West Resources pending criminal inquiry into environmental violations, falsified permits, and aggravated assault on whistleblowers. A rustle went through the courtroom. Silas felt Ruth's hand grip his coat sleeve lightly. Your Honor, said the state attorney, rising with confidence. We submit visual and testimonial evidence from this group including GPS-verified footage of unreported chemical dumping and a first-hand account of assault and forced entrapment of a minor Miss Mariah Tohey, age 17. Mariah stood. Grace helped her balance. The room fell silent. "My name is Mariah Tohey," she said, her voice calm but resonant. "I was employed without contract at Sierra West's maintenance facility. When I tried to report chemical leakage and safety failures, they locked me inside a mine shaft. I escaped, and with the help of these people documented the illegal activities at Barrel Creek Ridge." The judge narrowed her eyes. "Were you coerced into making this statement?" "No, ma'am. I've never been more certain of anything in my life." The footage played. Every screen in the courtroom showed it: the rusted barrels buried in the ridge, the drainage tubes leading into the creek, and finally the footage from the drone: 3 men in cold weather gear unloading barrels under cover of night. The timestamp was clear. The GPS coordinates didn't lie. When it ended, no one spoke. The judge looked over her glasses. "Do you have additional corroboration?" Samuel stood. "Yes, ma'am. Matching soil samples, water toxicity reports, and a trail of falsified environmental clearance forms traced to Sierra West's board." The defense tried to object, but the damage was done. Then the court rules in favor of the injunction, the judge said sharply. "Effective immediately. All operations at Barrel Creek Ridge are suspended. Law enforcement is authorized to secure the site. Federal investigations will proceed." Applause broke out from the gallery. Grace hugged Mariah tightly. Silas felt Ruth's head lean against his shoulder, relief softening her usually guarded expression. But it wasn't over. Outside the courthouse, media surrounded them. Flashbulbs popped. Microphones thrust forward. "Silas Yazzie, what do you say to the company's statement that this is a political stunt?" He didn't blink. "I say they should come out and drink the water from that creek." Laughter broke out. Reporters scribbled. One stepped forward. "Ms. Tohey, what happens next?" Mariah stepped closer to the microphone. "What happens next is justice. For the land. For the people who trusted them. For the ones who didn't make it out." She looked down at the scar on her hand, where the mine rope had torn her skin. "I'm not hiding anymore. And we're not done." Ellis stepped in to guide them away, but not before Mariah whispered to Silas. "You think they'll stop?" Silas scanned the crowd, the barricades, the way certain people didn't clap or even watch, just stood at the edges like shadows. "No," he murmured. "Not yet. The truth scares them." "Then we keep going," she said. "Until it doesn't." They crossed the plaza, shoulders squared, the cold sharp in their lungs. Behind them, the bells of the courthouse began to chime noon. But in their steps, no more silence. Only purpose. A man can fight for justice, but it's faith that keeps him standing when the wind howls and the fire dies low. The wind howled hard that evening across the canyon, a moaning sound that echoed through the dead pine trunks like ghosts refusing to rest. Silas tightened his coat, standing on the ridge where the illegal barrels had been unearthed. The work crews were gone now, government-ordered, supervised by men with gloves and clipboards, their trucks lined up like soldiers. But the air still reeked of rot and chemicals, a stink that refused to blow away. He knelt beside one of the deep divots in the earth. The barrel was gone, shipped to a lab, but the stain it left on the soil remained dark, wet, and unnatural. No new grass would grow here. Not for a while. He ran his gloved fingers through the dirt, watching it crumble like ash. "You always this quiet when the war ends," Ruth's voice came behind him, dry and warm like aged whiskey. He stood slowly, brushing his hands on his jeans. "Who says it's ended?" She stepped beside him, her eyes distant but still sharp. "I saw the order. Sierra West's top brass are resigning. The Department of Justice is launching indictments. That mine's dead. So is their money. Silas shook his head. But it's not just about the mine. It never was. They didn't try to kill Mariah because of a payroll error. They tried because she pulled back the curtain, and now the curtain's in flames. Ruth glanced toward the ridge where the last rays of sun struck the snow. Still doesn't feel finished. It won't for a long time. He turned and started walking down the narrow trail leading back to the old ranger station. The cold bit at his knees, but he welcomed it. Felt real. Felt earned. Inside the station, the wood stove glowed. Grace had brought more firewood, her hands chapped, but determined. Mariah sat cross-legged on the floor, sorting through papers. Maps, schedules, reports, all filed and marked with highlighter tabs. Pastor Jeremiah sat nearby, quietly praying over a ledger book they'd found in one of the company trailers. Mariah looked up as Silas and Ruth entered. "We found payroll logs," she said. Names of workers who were never registered with the state. Half of them undocumented, the other half fake. Silas hung his coat, then leaned over her shoulder to read. The numbers ran like a ghost ledger, payment amounts too low to be legal dates that overlapped with known dumping operations. "You think they used them to keep quiet?" Ruth asked. Mariah nodded. "Or to disappear them when things got tight. No contracts, no records." Jeremiah closed his book. "You expose this, there'll be more than fines. You'll bury them," good Silas said. "They buried enough." For a long moment, no one spoke. Outside, the storm gusted harder, snow sweeping across the window like white noise. The stove crackled. Then Grace stood and walked to the door. "You should see this," she said. They followed her outside, boots crunching through new snow. In the distance, headlights bounced down the mountain trail. A convoy, 3 black SUVs, and a sand-colored military vehicle. Ruth tensed. "You expecting company?" Silas shook his head slowly. "No one friendly." The vehicles stopped. Men stepped out, some in suits, others in plain windbreakers, federal from the look of them. One man, tall and broad, walked toward the station. His badge flashed under his coat, Department of Interior Tribal Lands Oversight. "Silas Yazzie," he called. "That's me. I'm Agent Briggs. We need to speak inside. Now." Back in the ranger station, the mood chilled even more. Briggs and 2 associates sat at the long table while the others waited outside. Mariah remained silent, her fingers drumming the wood. Ruth stood behind Silas like a shield. "We're here to inform you that the land your evidence came from, Barrel Creek Ridge, is under legal review for reclassification. There's a petition being filed to revert the tract to sovereign tribal control." Jeremiah narrowed his eyes, under whose name Briggs hesitated. "The Dumai Band." Silas froze. That band hasn't held recognized status in decades. They've recently received financial backing and legal counsel from a private firm. Their claim includes this ridge and surrounding watershed. If the petition is approved, it could delay prosecution as jurisdiction shifts to tribal courts. Mariah's jaw clenched. "Delay prosecution, that means bury it again." Briggs leaned forward. "Not necessarily, but it complicates matters." Ruth stepped closer. "You mean someone's paying to buy silence again?" Briggs didn't answer. He stood buttoning his coat. "You'll receive formal notice. I suggest your team doesn't destroy any more evidence in the meantime." After they left, silence choked the room. Wind howled louder as if protesting. Grace broke it. "They're trying to erase what we did." Mariah's hands shook as she reached for the file folder. "Not if we get ahead of them." Silas crossed the room to the map pinned to the wall. Barrel Creek, the abandoned shaft, the ridge. "They're using the tribal sovereignty laws to muddy the water," he said. It's dirty, it's clever, and it's legal. But it's not just about law, Ruth said quietly. It's about faith. Silas turned. Faith in the truth, in what people believe when the smoke clears. If we lose that, she tapped her chest, then we've already lost. A man can fight for justice, Silas said, echoing her words. But it's faith that keeps him standing when the wind howls and the fire dies low. He looked to Mariah. Get those files to the tribal press. Let the people see what was done. Don't wait for courtrooms. She nodded, firelighting behind her eyes. They huddled closer around the stove. Outside, the storm kept rising, but inside the fire burned steady. The educational lesson learned from this story is that even in later years, your voice, your values, and your choices still matter more than you may realize. Family is proven through care and action, not blood alone, and it is never wrong to set boundaries when respect is missing. Standing up for what is right can feel exhausting, but quiet courage often leaves the deepest mark. Finally, accepting help and offering it in return is not a sign of weakness, but a way to keep dignity, purpose, and connection alive.